And
Perfect.
we are excited to kick off our next panel on autonomous vehicles. The panel will be moderated by Dr. Maha Achour, CEO of Metawave, and joining us on the panel, Quin Garcia, Managing Director at Autotech Ventures. Please help me welcome our panelists, and I will let Dr. Achour take it from here.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Quin, for joining this session. And, we have 30 minutes, so the goal is to have an introduction to Autotech as well as Metawave for like first 10 minutes, and then we can go over the panel discussion on the autonomous vehicle, and then we can have some Q&A. So maybe Quin, if you have something to share, I think there is a button on the middle, like an arrow upward that you can click on and to share your screen. If you want to share some slides about Autotech, you can just verbally introduce your firm.
Let's see if this works.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. So Maha, I think I'll just give a few minutes overview, maybe 3-5 minutes of who Autotech is, and then pass the baton back to you. Is that right?
Perfect. That would be great.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Quin Garcia. I'm one of the managing directors of Autotech Ventures, and I'll share a few slides about us here. And then we can get into the rest of our conversation. So we focus on ground transportation and mobility. So movement of people and goods along roads is our scope. You can see here on the slide here, we have the traditional kind of CASE acronym, or ACEs, that everyone talks about. And then we add a D on the end that we call digitization. So connectivity, autonomy, sharing, electrification, and digitization. And in a few minutes, I'll speak about what digitization is. We have about a little over 275 million bucks under management across two main funds. Our fund one, which was 2016 vintage, 120 million bucks, invested into 17 startups, has had 4 exits so far, and a couple more on the way with via SPACs. And then we have a fund 2 that we're investing out of right now, which is 150 million bucks, and that's invested into about 14 as of today. It just recently had an exit with Drover being acquired by Kazoo, and we're a little different from a typical VC firm in a couple ways. One, we only do ground transportation, nothing else, nothing that flies, nothing that floats, just movement of people and goods along the ground. And many of our LPs in our funds are not only your traditional institutional LPs like fund of funds and family offices and the like, but we also have many transport industry insiders. So we have the world's largest corporations, number 1 or number 2 corporation from pretty much every segment of the ground transport value chain behind us as strategic investors in our funds. And we involve those investors in our investment process to help the entrepreneurs, the startups that we invest in, by helping them connect up with these large corporations. And we exist because we want to use technology to solve the world's ground transport problems. And the reason why it's become interesting to be a venture capitalist in this space, an entrepreneur in this space, is now about, let's call it 5-10 years ago, the tech giants started to enter the transport sector. So you start to see Google and Apple and Amazon and Chinese and the Koreans and Rakuten out in Japan. And that really shook up a lot of the incumbents in the transport sector. And these are both transport corporations that have been doing manufacturing of vehicles, but also transport services, right? So buying, selling of vehicles, insurance, parking, refueling, and so on. And so with that, the entry of those tech giants, that's created this kind of explosion of entrepreneurship and venture capital in this space over the last, call it 10 years or so. And so we said, hey, let's form a venture capital firm that focuses exclusively on this space and serves as a bridge between entrepreneurs who want to solve a transport problem and large corporations, on the other hand, who are really good at scaling and helping startups to scale. And as I mentioned earlier, so these are the kind of 5 main megatrends that we focus on, cased, and hopefully the first 4 are really self-explanatory. And I think today we're talking about autonomy, and I would just add a D on the end, digitization, which we think of as both Industry 4.0, basically using IT to automate and streamline a corporation's internal operations. Let's say using computer vision on an assembly line to automate, quality assurance and inspection. Another form of digitization is e-commerce. So transacting with a corporation's customers on one end or suppliers on the other end electronically. And within those 5 main megatrends, there's a variety of pain points that exist out there in the ground transport sector. Startup companies are trying to solve, and so we're just basically looking for insights from corporations on one hand who tell us their pain points, many of which are our limited partners in our funds, and then startup companies on the other hand who have hypotheses around pain points that exist and that they want to solve. So we're looking for folks solving these pain points, and we want to provide them capital and connections to solve those. And I will just skip over this slide real quick. And so while we are a financially motivated VC firm, so our we need to generate financial returns in order to continue to exist. We also care about the world, and we care about solving transport problems. And we love it when we see our portfolio companies solving some kind of environmental or social issue that exists through transportation. And so far, I think a lot of our companies have done a great job of doing that. And we mainly invest at the early stage, so we can do early to mid-stage startup investments. So meaning mainly seed and Series A companies, but then we can also opportunistically do mid-stage companies like a Series B or a Series C, mainly US, but opportunistic overseas. And in terms of tech types of tech that we invest into or business models. So as you can see here on the side, it can be embedded software, it could be digital marketplaces, SaaS, licensing, or even capital light hardware. And I would say Maha and Metawave are a great example of a capital light hardware company. So with that, I think I will pause there, and I'll pass it back to you, Maha.
Great, thank you so much, Quin. And it's been a pleasure, of course, having Quin and Autotech involved with Metawave from the beginning. So let me share my screen. See if we can see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, I'm going to take just a couple of minutes so we have more discussion about the panel. So Makewave is a startup company, and we're focused both on mobility and connectivity. Hopefully, at the end of my presentation, you'll realize why, and during also the panel discussion. The problem that we're solving in the autonomous vehicle and also in driver assist transportation is the ability to operate in all weather condition and all driving conditions, especially like in the weather, bad weather. So radar is the only sensor, or the primary sensor, that can address these kind of harsh environment. And we are very proud to be the first company to demonstrate high performance radar in that market. On the connectivity space, as Quin mentioned, digitization. Digitization is also happening in manufacturing, in smart cities, smart road, and so forth. So we are targeting multiple platforms, ground transportation with cars, trucks, trains, last mile robot deliveries, as well as aerial. And our performance, mainly, as I mentioned, in addition to the weather, being able to detect, track, and classify objects at ranges beyond 300 meters. So far, no radar, including the top tier 1 radars, be able to match our performance. And also target the OEMs, criteria in terms of the smaller size, lighter weight, and also a price point that can meet the consumer market. These are some of the benchmark that we have checked with our early demonstration. The radar has been successfully tested with trucks, trains, cars, as well as people around the value chain, from a tier 1 all the way to the top of the food chain. And in particular, you can see the detection of cars as well as pedestrians. So we're able to detect and track pedestrian beyond 200 meters. And now you see more and more governments are trying to impose higher safety in a left turn environment. So now even the corner radar need to be able to see very long range. On the 5G, on the connectivity side, we're also one of the first companies to enable extending the coverage at these edge 5G processes for low latency, high capacity coverage. And these two industries, both the mobility and connectivity industries, are merging in smart cities, smart infrastructure. And we have demonstrated passive reflectors that are fully able to extend the range by 50 meters without license, without power, without wiring, fully green technologies, and also our all analog active repeater that can further extend the range of these radios by another 200 to 250 meters. Our customer base, as you can see in the...
Maha?
Yes.
At least on my side, your slides are not advancing. I don't know if for everyone else they're advancing, but I just see the intro slide that says advancing mobility and boosting connectivity.
I am so sorry.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, it has to be the projection. So I'm just going to quickly just glance over them since we already covered them, and then I'll make sure in our panel discussion that I advance these slides this way. So I'm currently on the slide here where I speak about our customer base. So as you can see, let me see that our customer base, we're working with the OEMs, with the auto suppliers, the tier ones, the vertically integrated companies too, especially the one located in the Bay Area, very soon on Real and other potential customers. On the mobility side, as you can imagine, we work a lot with the mobile carrier around the world, network provider, and so forth. So let me just pause here and then move into our main presentation, which will be quite exciting. Let me just share that screen and make sure this time I advance it by hand. Okay, so let's start with the back to the future. And, Quin, if you can just add more colors to these slides. So what will the world look like 10, 15, 20 years from now? Just remembering the early 1990 with the mobile phone, how it was a kind of a shoebox, and now it's a supercomputer in your pocket. So the vision that mobility is going to become quite available, and it will be quite competitive. And as you can see here, some of the costs on the cars being ranging from 10 cents to 20 cents and so forth. So mobility as a service, as Quin mentioned, delivery of goods, both on the long haul and last mile, as well as the ability to effectively and safely put autonomous vehicle on the road. We will focus more on the ground application, but there is also aerial with air taxis and drones for delivery of goods and mobility of people. And most importantly is the consumer experience with these services. We've heard many stories with the early Waymo and Cruise services, and the consumer sometimes frustration, sometimes also pleasure with these services, and we'll talk a little bit about the safety ratings. So Quin, do you have anything to add on the future before we go to today's?
Yeah, I would just add, on-road autonomy, it's obviously a huge problem for society that can be, solved with automation. And so robo-taxis and haul trucks, and then also last mile delivery bots, really important problems to solve. I would also add that a call it lesser known form of autonomy would be off-road or off-highway autonomy. So autonomous mining vehicles, autonomous construction vehicles, autonomous warehouse vehicles, farm vehicles. We think that those are really interesting problems to be solved with automation. And key difference between on-road and off-road is, well, off-highway, you tend to be running on private property. And when you're running on private property, you're not subject to nearly as much government regulation, and you can control the environment more easily. Thus, the challenges aren't quite as great in terms of policy and engineering and otherwise as you have in on-road. And so the time to market and the cost to actually come to market and solve some of those off-highway autonomy applications can actually be, it can be a lot easier.
Great, thank you so much, Quin. And then let's move on the hype versus reality, especially when I started Metawave in 2017. I think the hype's even before that, but let's go now to the reality. Obviously, the future can be realized. All the building block technologies are available. It's just the time to integrate them to meet the safety requirement and so forth. So I borrowed this, curve from Gartner in terms of the hype cycle, and this is, I think it was July 2020. So it's a post-initial COVID. You can see the impact of COVID early on, especially in the micromobility, the long-haul delivery of goods, last mile, robot delivery, as well as the impact on shared and mass transportation because of COVID, right? So we do learn from these social impact on the transportation. And in particular, you can see here that the flying autonomous vehicle is getting to the peak hype. It's a yellow triangle, so this is still more than 10 years from now to become a true reality. And if you take a look at the mobility of a service, is in the 5 to 10 years, as well as autonomous vehicle, and also on the perception, the full perception system that will allow these fully autonomous operation to take place in a safe environment. Quin, do you need to add anything to this slide?
I would just add, Maha, hype is good.
I know.
Kind of ironic to hear, a venture capitalist say that, given, the VC industry spends so much time hyping different businesses. But I say it's good in the long term for society, because where there's hype, there is discussion, and there are resources flowing to solve a problem. So hype generated, whether it be around autonomous or connectivity or smart mobility, it just means people are talking and people are pumping their time and their money to try to solve a problem. And initially, during that hype phase, there actually isn't much productivity, meaning the problem is not solved yet. Folks are just talking about how are we going to solve it. And then later on, the hype kind of wears off, and then the productivity increases.
Exactly. And to that point, I want to add the SPACs. So SPACs is another form of funding companies in a growth stage to compete, with other governments that are providing unlimited funding to their enterprise companies like China and others. So the SPACs is another way of also, I'm not saying amplifying the hype, but bringing the hype to the reality and get to that future of the connected cars platform. Great. All right. So now let's talk about safety, and especially safety without drivers. Of course, drivers, they are one of the key factors in all the road casualties and accidents. And we imagine 5, 10, 15 years from now, the roads are going to be much safer. It will take a lot of time and effort and consolidation, as you will see, along the value chain, and very close and tight operation with municipalities and government to make that happen. So what do we mean by driving without autonomous vehicle without a driver? I'm not going to go over details of what's L2+, L3, L4, and 5, but here what we're talking about is fully autonomous, which is the L4. I don't know if ever we're going to have an L5. It's going to take a long time to get to the L5 operation. But in that scenario, it's very critical for all these vehicles to be able to operate and have a full perception of the environment without missing a single object, a single bicycle, a single motorcycle, in order to avoid casualties. And that is, in my opinion, one of the building principle of autonomous vehicle in general. Quin?
Nothing to add on that one.
Perfect, very good. So how do you reach autonomy? How do you reach these level of safety? Sensors. It all starts with the hardware. And as you can see here in the left side of the figure, you have the radar, you have the cameras, the LiDAR, other types of sensor, infrared, ultrasonic, and you have the brain, which is the full perception. And all of this, you want to avoid hazards, cut in and cut out, being able to detect and track all these objects in urban, dense environment, as well as on freeway and highways. So how do you be able to get to that high level of perception and safety? And it all starts, number one, with the hardware platforms, and then number two, with how these hardwares operate and are integrated in the sensor stacks. And as you will see in the next couple of slides, how also the OEMs are migrating through the value chain to make sure they can guarantee these safety requirements for their future taxis or mobility as a service fleets. Anything you want to add, Quin?
Yeah, I would just add that we as a firm have been really excited about solving perception. And Maha, the work that you do with Metawave is related to perception. So we first have to see our environment around us through various sensor modalities, whether it be radar, like you develop, or LiDAR, or cameras, or ultrasound, or otherwise. We first have to see that, and then we can fuse into kind of a mental model of the world around us, and then we can chart a course through that environment through path planning to avoid running into stuff. And so we've made a number of investments into the perception hardware space and also in the perception software space.
Great, yeah, it's a very tight coupling between hardware and software, all the way up to the high level of software stack, and that's something that Metawave is involved in. So as you go to the level 4 and 5, as you can see here, the car will have a very large number of sensors in terms of the radar, in terms of the camera, the LiDAR, in order to meet so many applications. And the problem, of course, here, as you get to this high level of autonomy, power consumption becomes a problem, because most of these cars are going to be electric, EV cars, and running these software stacks on in a car, and also running the hardware. They have to be very, very efficient. So that's something that, like Metawave, we're working on from the first day on how to make it very efficient, how to make it small enough, to make it appealing also to the consumer as they get into these cars in the future. All right, so I think the next slide is going to be very interesting, because Tesla, as you know, they kind of disrupted the whole value chain of the automotive industry. And many people early on didn't believe that they're going to make it, but they proved them wrong. And we see now more and more companies are trying to evolve in this value chain. I'll give you just an example. Bosch, which typically is a tier 1, they build a radar for the OEMs. Now they are building their own transceiver chip, so they become their own tools. And most of these software stack integrated companies like Cruise, like Waymo, they also build their own sensor for very good reasons, because the ones on the on the market, they don't meet these level 4 capabilities. So at the end of the day, it's all about, as I mentioned, the user experience. And the user experience is driven by the cell phone. So in the future, I think what we will see 10, 15 years from now, that's we see also Apple is playing in that space, and Amazon is coming to play in that space as well, is who's going to be driving these platforms. You're going to have the Apple platform driven by the iPhone, the iCar, and so forth. Android driven by the Google platform. Not sure about Tesla's future ambition in terms of how do they also integrate with these cell phones and so forth. Where, give you an example about Metawave, why Metawave is so critical. Because if you take a look at the silicon on a chip, the SoC companies, these are kind of the building blocks to build a hardware sensor that is capable to detect and track and provide all the perception. You cannot, if you just choose any of these chips, there is no, you're going to get the range, you're going to get the resolution, all of these requirements for the L4 safety. And the Metawave is basically building an additional module that is augmenting these tier 2 chipset in order to meet these performances. So we will see more and more of these companies appearing in order to get to this L4 operation. Quin?
Yeah, only thing I could add there, Maha, so actually a bunch of the corporations that are shown there in your slide are LPs in the funds that that we manage, and their radar has been around for a while in production environments. The challenge with existing radar solutions is just the resolution, the range, let's call it, high performance isn't quite there. And so a lot of these corporations rely heavily on startup companies to innovate and try to solve some of those challenges, the shortcomings of existing solutions, whether it be cameras or radar or otherwise. But startups tend to have challenges with scaling. They tend to be very fast to innovate and very slow to scale. Corporations tend to be the inverse of that, very slow to innovate and very fast to scale. So in our experience, being a startup and pairing up with a corporation to scale is a recipe for success.
Thank you, Quin. So I know we only have 4 minutes left. I'm going to share a little bit about the V2X, the connectivity side, and how the V2X, V2V, V2I will further augment and the capabilities of each vehicle, regardless if it's on the air, on the ground, in order to meet these high-level perceptions. So putting all of this together, we've witnessed so many paradigm shifts in automotive, going from combustion to electrification, in wireless going from fixed to mobile, in computing going from analog to digitization, and now the AI, 5G, Internet of Things, we're going to go into smart cars, roads, cities. So it's really a great privilege for Metawave to be involved in all of these three building blocks to get to the next level of smart cities and also smart roads. I think that's all that we have that Quin and I prepared to share with you. I know we don't have time for questions, but you know how to reach us via LinkedIn, and we'll be very happy to provide you with more insights.
Well, thank you both very much. That was absolutely fascinating, and I really do appreciate your time today. I'd like to give you a virtual round of applause, and we'll invite our listeners to do the same. And so thank you all, and please join us in the startup session. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Quin. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.